All right, good morning. It turned off cold again here. I'm not sure what happens down here in the south, but it's in the 40s today, and I'm not happy about it, but I'm going to take it because it is what it is. And so anyway, hope you guys had a great night last night. We ended up riding up to Aniana and hung out with my little girl. She turned 38 yesterday, so we hung out with her and the grandkids and her husband Brent, and had a great night. Just hanging out, getting some snow cone thingy up there in Aniana, and then hung out at their house and just enjoyed being together. And love my family and love everything about them. And so it was good. It was a good night. And looking forward to everything God has for us today, and looking forward to sharing with you from the Word of God this morning. And so we are in Acts chapter 27. We're going to finish that, Lord willing, today, and then we'll have a couple of days to look at 28, and then one day to kind of just see how Paul's life ended. And so we'll do a little historical trail through that. So here we are. We're on a ship, and just kind of get you up to speed with what's going on. Paul has set sail for Rome. It's going to be a lengthy trip. They're about 14 days into it when we find ourselves here, caught in a hurricane. And so this is where we are. What we looked at for the past yesterday and then today as well. It really is about how godly leadership really is a game changer in so many ways. And I've kind of started writing down some biblical principles of leadership, just really out of this story here, and they're pretty fascinating when you start looking at it. And it makes me hungry for godly leadership. Really everywhere you turn. A business that has godly leadership. I don't mean a business who's Christian owned. I mean a business whose Christian owners are godly. Godly leaders in a business make an incredible difference. Can you imagine what it'd be like to have godly leaders in our country today? And there's a void. There's a void across the spectrum, from the farthest right to the farthest left. There's a void of Christian leadership, and in the political realm, at least. Now, I'm not saying within the parties there may not be. There's none that have risen to the top and are just godly leaders, not necessarily Christian leaders. And I want to make sure there's a difference between that. One who's just they have a godly understanding of how life works, and they have full trust in a sovereign God, and they don't mind speaking their voice, not in a beat you over the head matter, but just of wisdom rising to the top. You never hear about Paul banging the symbols of Jesus really in this deal here. You just see that he rises to the top, and people begin to listen. He goes from a slave getting on a ship to one who's giving orders as that ship has run aground and is breaking up. And so you just see how that happens. And so we looked at that yesterday. We got as far as verse 26. I want to try and catch us up to that. And so we get to verse 20. I'm going to pick up there because there's been on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands and all that. I mean, they're in the middle of this storm after Paul had told them it'd probably be a good idea if you didn't go. They didn't listen. So it says this, verse 20, for many days neither sun nor stars appeared, and the severe storm kept raging. I mean, it's just pitch darkness. There's no sun or stars appearing because the cloud coverage and all of that that's taking place. And listen to what it says. Finally, all hope was fading that we would be saved. Now, when you read what Luke says there, you can almost read into that he was losing hope too, that we would be saved. And so he's not speaking kind of third person, like, hey, they had lost all hope that they would be saved. He's like, hey, we're all in this together. We've lost a lot of hope here. I mean, I don't see how this is going to turn out well for us. Now, verse 21, and we looked at this yesterday too, but this is going to give us that running start. Since they had been without food for a long time, um, Paul then stood up among them and said, "You men should have followed my advice not to sail from Crete and sustain this damage and loss." Now, if we go back to verse 9, we read that Paul spoke up, really, even if no one listens. Do you remember verse 9 and 11? Let's go there real quick just so you can kind of see that. It says, "By now, much time had passed, and the voyage is already dangerous, since the Day of Atonement was already over." That means we're into October. There was a certain strand of sea that they would not even let you travel from, like, I think it's November on, but October in that area is not advisable. So it's like the yellow flag warning, and then it turns into the red warning, I guess, if to keep the nautical deal going. That's where they were. Paul gave this advice and told them, "Man, I can see this voyage is headed toward disaster and heavy loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also our lives." But the centurion paid attention to the captain and the owner of the ship rather than Paul. So there we go. And then you get to verse 21 and 26, and now he's going to speak up. And listen, obviously, in Paul's mind, it's okay to say, "Hey, I told you so," right? I think sometimes that builds that credibility, and that's where leverage comes in as a leader. So he says, since they had been without food for a long time, Paul then stood among them and said, "You men should have followed my advice not to sail from Crete and sustain this damage and loss." All this wreckage and carnage, you captain of your ship and all of you people on board, this is a result of your failure to listen to good godly advice. Now, verse 22, "I urge you to take courage, because there will be no loss of any of your lives, but only of the ship." Now, that's a bold statement to make. Paul makes that statement not because he thinks he heard from the Lord, but because he's convinced he heard from the Lord. Listen, there are a lot of people who think they heard from the Lord and make these outlandish statements, and they don't come true. Here's where the difference between a godly leader and a wannabe is. Certain people want to hear from the Lord, and they will even imagine it to be so, and then they will spout off all kind of silliness. I've witnessed that in my own life as people have prophesied over me and everything else, and you get people crazies out of the woodwork doing that. And it should be a very careful thing before you add "thus saith the Lord" to anything that you say to someone. But Paul was convinced because Paul understood, and he was that godly man. And it says here, "For last night an angel of God that I belong to," of the God I belong. See, he's not slamming them at this point. He's just saying, "Hey, listen, an angel of the God that I believe in, I belong to and serve, and I am his servant, stood by me and said, 'Don't be afraid, Paul. It is necessary for you to appear before Caesar, and indeed God has graciously given you all of those who are sailing with you. So take courage, men, because I believe God that it will be just the way it was told to me. But we have to run aground on some island. We can't keep going this way. We've got to run aground." So what you see here, man, is here's a guy taking charge. He started out as a slave on the ship who had already gotten the trust of Julius, the commander, because he let him go on shore at one of the stops to get some care from his friends and to have some needs met. So now we come to where we were yesterday, verse 27, when the 14th night came. So, man, for 14 nights, no sun, no stars, just being bashed here and fro, having done all they can to batten the hatches and strap the ship and all of that. When the 14th night came, we were drifting in the Adriatic Sea. That's a sea within the Mediterranean Sea. And so they're in this area, and it says about midnight, the sailors thought they were approaching land, because you hear the waves hit, and you go, that doesn't sound normal, and so they're assuming, hey, we may be close to land. So they took soundings and found it to be 120 feet deep. Now, what they would do there is they had a rope with a heavy object on it. They would drop it down, and they would wait till the rope went slack. They'd pull it till it was taut, mark it, and then when they pulled it up, they could measure it. So they took a sounding, and it says that the soundings found it to be 120 feet deep. And when they had sailed a little farther and sounded again, they found it to be 90 feet. So they're coming on shore and they know it. Then fearing we might run aground on the rocks. They can't see anything because of all the deal. So you can imagine they're going, oh man, we're land somewhere. There's some land. Now it's not like you just land in the panhandle of Florida where there's nothing but beachy sand. Think more like the coastline of Maine and others where you've got rocks that jut out into the ocean, and you can hit on one of those and you may still be a good bit from the shore and your boat's all just destroyed. And so this is what they're looking at. Then fearing we might run aground on the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern, so the back of the boat. They dropped 4 anchors and pray and just start praying for daylight, right? And so that's what's going on, hoping that maybe we can slow this thing down so that at least we can see where we're heading when daylight comes. Verse 30, some sailors tried to escape from the ship. Now listen, Paul had already said, hey man, y'all need to behave. Anyway, they had let down the skiff into the sea, pretending that they were going to put out anchors from the bow. So they're like, hey man, we're just, don't mind us. We're just going to get in the boat and we're going to kind of go over there and do some stuff, right? Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, why in the world would they be listening to him? Because he's already given credibility and demonstrated a godly authority. He says, unless these men stay in this ship, you can't be saved. Then the soldiers cut the ropes holding the skiff and let it drop away. So before these guys could get in the boat, man, they just cut the boat and let it go. So you're all in now. You burned the bridges. Everybody's on this boat. We live on the boat or we die on the boat. Now, when it was daylight, Paul urged them to take food, saying, today's the 14th day that you've been waiting and going without food, having eaten nothing. Now, here's Paul is in command of everything now. He's having to babysit them and say, hey, man, you guys ought to eat, you know? And so he says, so I urge you to take some food, for this is for your survival, since none of you will lose a hair from your head. Listen, not one of you is going to incur any damage in this shipwreck. Calm down. He sounds like a man that knows they may have a lot to think about, but they've got nothing to worry about, right? That's the mantra of a godly man. Listen, I may have a lot to think about, but I've got nothing to worry about. And so this is where they are. For this is for your survival, since none of you will lose a hair from your head. After he had said these things and had taken some bread, he gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And after he broke it, he began to eat. So he's like, hey, man, you guys ought to eat. I mean, I'm just telling you, man, you're all going to be fine. Breathe. And then he just breaks his bread and kicks back and prays to God Most High, and they hear him, that prayer. I would love to have known how powerful that prayer must have been as he's praying that, the confidence of a godly man in the midst of a shipwreck. It has this calm, authoritative tone about him that's not coming from within. It's coming from above. And so this is who he is. They were all encouraged and took food for themselves. They see the calmness of Paul. See, this is why a godly man matters. A godly man is calm in the face of destruction and so forth. They're not anything but that. Think Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Think them when they're getting ready to be thrown in the fiery furnace. They're going, hey, we ain't bowing down. Our God is able to deliver us. And even if he won't, we ain't bowing down, right? Think Daniel, knowing that he was going to be thrown into the lion's den if he prayed publicly. He's unmoved by that. He opens his windows, prays like he did every day. They arrest him, throw him in the lion's den. Think about David as he runs to Goliath. Who is this tyrant of a man that he should taunt the servants of the living God, right? And he rushes to the battle there. You see that in every turn. You see that's what godly men do. And so this is why we need good godly leadership, and then it rises up. Anyway, so let's get back to the story. They were all encouraged and took food for themselves. Where did that courage come from? They borrowed it from Paul, right? In all, there were 276 of us on the ship. When they had eaten enough, they began to lighten the ship by throwing the grain overboard and into the sea. So they've done everything they could do. They've eaten, and now they're trying to lighten the boat because they know they're getting ready to try and run this thing aground so that they can get safely to the island. So, verse 39, when daylight came, they did not recognize the land, but sighted a bay with a beach. They planned to run the ship ashore if they could. After cutting, interesting, if you were to go to Malta, this is the island that they find out that they're on, you'll hear, or you will see St. Paul's Harbor, St. Paul's Bay. Wonder where it got that name, right? Because they're all going, hey, if it would have been for Paul, we never would have made this bay right here that has taken us to safety. So if I ever get to Malta, I'm going to St. Paul's Bay, and I want to see what that land and the lay of the land looked like. But this is where it is. And so it says they planned to run the ship ashore if they could. After cutting loose the anchors, they left them in the sea. So they didn't hoist them in. They're trying to lighten their load. Look, they're not trying to preserve anything at this point, just their lives. They just cut the anchors. We're done with those. And after cutting them loose, they left them in the sea. At the same time, loosening the ropes that held the rudders. We're not going to try and steer this thing. We're just gonna let it do what it does. Then they hoisted the foresail to the wind and headed to the beach. But they struck a sandbar and ran the ship aground. The bow jammed fast and remained immovable while the stern began to break up. So it hits the sandbar and it's not going anywhere. But now the back end of it is just getting bashed by the wind and by the waves, and so it's busting up. So the soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoner so that no one could swim away and escape. But the centurion kept them from carrying out their plan because he wanted to save Paul. So listen. Luke and all his buddies better be grateful that Paul demonstrated that godly leadership, because that's what saved him. That centurion said, we're not letting Paul die. No, we're not killing any slaves. But the centurion kept them from carrying out the plan, right? Because he wanted to save Paul. So he ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and get to land. He's like, hey man, if you think you can swim, have at it. It's every man for himself at this point. You're a swimmer, swim. If you're not, hey, stay on board, wait for this thing to break up, find you a piece of wood, a door, a cargo crate, whatever you can find. And then it says, but the centurion kept them from carrying. All right, verse 44. The rest were to follow, some on planks and some on debris from the ship. In this way, everyone safely reached the shore. All 276 men accounted for. Now, whether Paul swam or whether he held on to a deal, I don't know. He's probably like, hey, I'm kind of a seasoned veteran at this shipwreck thing. I'm cool. He probably was the last one on the boat to jump off. That's my guess, but who knows? But that's the story of the shipwreck. Now, this thing gets crazy, and it gets even better. Tomorrow, by the end of the evening tomorrow, they're going to be calling Paul a god. And that's a story for tomorrow. I can't wait to share that with you. And Lord willing, I'll see you then. Man, you guys have a great day. And hey, let's be leaders out there, right? I mean, the God of all creation, if we're believers, dwells within us. Let's be the beacon that people follow today. All right? Man, Lord bless you guys. Have a good one. Lord willing, I'll see you in the morning.